نطلع انجليزي نضغط ايه؟
وانا اضغط على الانجليش هنا عشان يطلع لك هنا انجليزي.
لما احنا بنطلع انجليزي بنضغط على بي.
لا الناحية التانية A عشان
ايه بنطلع عربي.
هاي جود مورنينج جود افترنون جود مورنينج. ايوه تمام. طب كلمني انت بقى، انا عايز اسمعك. ده هو سمعني واكتفى بكده.
عايز نسمع الفلور
انا عايز اسمع الفلور. عايز
هو احنا بنكون بنطلع انجليزي نضغط على ايه؟ عشان بس انا مش مستوعب.
طيب
hello.
اوكي continue please. كمل كده. تمام great.
hello سامعني؟
Hello. Hey, one. Hello, test the mic. 1 2 3. Test.
صح كده test. can you hear me now؟ سامعني دلوقتي English test.
ساب السماعة.
سابها تقريبا. انا ما كنتش ضاغطه. English, hello, can you hear me? English test. Okay.
Test the mic.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, this is good.
ايه عربي ولا ايه؟ هو عايز ايه؟
Test the mic. Test. Test one, testing, mic testing 1
Test mic 1. Okay, good.
2. Oh, there we go. That's better. That's real, isn't it? Okay. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this discussion on sustainable growth on the African continent through connectivity and green infrastructure. It's a real pleasure, it's a real honor to be here for this session, in particular because this is an Africa-focused discussion on the African continent for the first time for AIIB. So really pleased to have this opportunity and to be discussing infrastructure in a country in which historically has, as President Jim was mentioning yesterday, has been at the center of strong infrastructure development for many, many years. At the same time, infrastructure gaps are huge, so this is a very, very important discussion to have, and I'm really pleased that we have a very learned panel, practically experienced panel to discuss the topic. But before we can kick off the proceedings, let me just briefly introduce myself and also who will be giving us, setting the context for our discussion. I'm Hannah Ryder, the CEO of Development Reimagined, which is an African-led international development consultancy with our main office in China and in Nairobi and London. And to kick off our proceedings, we have the Vice President for Operations, Konstantin Limatovsky, who will be introducing this session and helping us to really understand why this is such an important topic. Please join us. Thank you.
It's going to take me a much longer time than 3-5 minutes to say why this is so important, because it is really a very important subject. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the session. It is one of the last one in our annual meeting, but very, very important. Glad to see many of you have a keen interest in present operations in Africa. AIIB has 106 members, and 55 of which outside of Asia, called non-regional. And this would also include 13 African countries. But this number is increasing. Normally, when we report increase in the number of shareholders, that would be the African countries joining. And today, there is there are 8 countries which are in the process of accession. In Africa, growing economies, the demand for sustainable infrastructure is getting stronger. Increasing access to modern and sustainable energy and increasing connectivity within Africa and between Africa and the rest of the world, including Asia, is key to the African growth. AIIB corporate strategy projects that 50% climate finance in our investments by 50% of our investment portfolio would be in climate finance. While mitigation is a key focus, we also recognize the importance of building resilience, which is of particular importance to our African members who are exposed to disproportionately adverse effect of climate change. Our bank is keen to engage more deeply with African members to achieve their climate mitigation and resilience goals. This panel session, I am confident, will explore the opportunities for connectivity and green infrastructure development, and I hope that we will also assess the role of different type of financial institutions and their role in Africa, including international financial institutions like us, and African Development Bank, our key partner in the region, and also private players, and we have representatives in our panel today on that. I wish us a successful debate and hope the discussion and engagements in this panel would lead us to working closer in our African projects going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vice President. Thank you for setting out that context for us, the importance of the African region to the AIIB, and also the importance of this discussion, which is focused on infrastructure and green infrastructure in particular, and connectivity. So let me introduce our esteemed panelists to you. I'm going to begin with women because I'm a woman, so I'm going to show some favoritism here. Suzanne Shaw is the Senior Infrastructure Economist at AIIB. She brings over 15 years of experience in advising and helping make happen over 1 billion of sustainable energy and climate resilient projects and investments, especially in the Caribbean. Thank you for joining us, Suzanne. Next to her, we have Mr. Gregory Liu, who is the Acting Director General for Infrastructure Investment for one of the two AIIB regions, Region 2. And he also brings a great deal of experience, 25 years, including in Sumitomo Mitsui Banking Corporation, also FITS and Deutsche, Dresdner Kleinwort Wasserton. Great deal of experience in, again, structuring and bringing together a great deal of infrastructure in investment finance. Next, we have Mr. Nader Rageb, who's the Vice President and the Group Treasurer for Orascom. If you don't know Orascom, and I'm going to say this for you, if you don't mind, it's Egypt's first multinational company, a construction and engineering firm. They're active in 25 countries, as far as I know, and you've been there for 14 years, and since 2020 been the Vice President and Group Treasurer for Orascom. So thank you very much for joining us as well. And next to Mr. Nader is Mr. Liu Kai, who is the Vice President and Acting Director for East and Southern African Headquarters of Power China. Now, again, if you don't know Power China, you probably should, because it is one of China's largest state-owned enterprises, comprises 779 companies, subsidiary companies, including Sino-Hydro, and which has been responsible for 65% or so of China's hydropower built domestically. So they've got a great deal of experience working here on the African continent very actively. I think you have a presence in, was it just over 20 African countries or more? 43, there you go, even more impressive. Mr. Liu Kai has been with the company for over 20 years, working in Africa for over 20 years. So thank you again also for joining us. And last but not least, we have Mr. Ahmed Rashid Atut, who is the Acting Director of the Financial Sector Development Department at the African Development Bank. Also brings over 23 years of experience across the Africa and MENA region. Strong focus on delivery of, I think, over 5 billion of transactions managed to over 35 African countries, previously at Societe Generale and Badea as well. So we have, this gives you an idea that we have a panel who have worked across the world, not just this continent, across the world on these issues, and so therefore can bring a great deal of practical experience for us that will help us really understand, well, can we get sustainable growth through infrastructure, and what can we do in order to make that happen? So let me kick off with a first question, I think to the MDBs in the room. And my first question, obviously infrastructure is a major priority. And, you know, every single African country needs more infrastructure. Kenya, country I'm from, my firm has recently estimated that we have an infrastructure gap. To meet the SDGs, we'd have to be spending 14 billion to 21 billion US dollars a year in order to build the right number of infrastructure to meet the SDGs. So if that's just one country on the continent, of course the infrastructure needs are huge. So my first question to yourselves is, what kind of role can the multilateral development banks really play in really plugging that infrastructure gap? How are you doing that? And what is, in terms of your experience so far, how can you put this into action? You've got 14 regional members, 14 African members of the AIIB. Obviously, I think pretty much 54 African countries are members of the AFDB. How do we do this? So perhaps starting with Suzanne and Greg.
Thank you. As you know, AIB is a new bank. So I would try to probably elaborate a bit further after Vice President Constantine gave his remark. We are an infrastructure-focused bank, and our slogan is to build infrastructure for tomorrow. That also leads to sustainable infrastructure, because when people think about infrastructure, they probably directly think about cement, steel. That's, I would tend to say, is a more narrower understanding. So for those of you who might have not known, AIB has put in place a corporate strategy since 2020. In that strategy, we have to promote connectivity and regional cooperation. We set a very ambitious target. By 2030, we want to see 25 to 30% is a link to the connectivity part. The second fold is the green infrastructure. The goal we set then is by 2025, we want to see 50% of our project is linked to climate finance. I'm actually very proud to report to you, by now we have already achieved this, apart from the non-traditional finance like the COVID relief facility. If we don't count the CRF, we have long achieved this target to have 50%. You asked the question about Africa, because Africa is what we call as a non-regional member. So people always ask, why do you, Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, come to Africa? I can share with you my humble observation. I did some search on the way to here, and from the connectivity part, Asia and Middle East constitute 36% of the trade with Africa. Europe also 36%. So there you can see, although maybe we are far away from each other, but we are actually connected. This is a physical connectivity. We also do digital connectivity. Then with the goods flow, efficiency can improve, people's living standard can improve. So that's fully in line with AIB's corporate strategy on the connectivity part. That's one angle we see we can contribute to Africa, but also benefiting Asia. So that's one of the reasons why we feel there should be lots of room for us to cooperate together. The second fold is that we have a non-regional member investment criteria, which usually want to see some public goods apart from the connectivity part. the public goods angle, we see it from the climate finance side. I think most of you, if you live in Africa, you probably know, to date, 40% of the electricity generated in this continent is from burning gas. 30% is from burning coal. 6% is still from burning oil. So altogether, approximately 80% of the electricity generated on this continent is from fossil fuel. Well, emission will affect everybody. It doesn't have a boundary. So if as an Asian-initiated bank, if through investment in renewable energy, especially in the new capacity, which we can help reduce the emission and prevent the climate change, that would also be our contribution.
Right.
I actually think there's a lot of room. We work with MDB who are from Africa.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Suzanne, would you like to add anything to that?
Yes, the second part of your question was how we put this into action. So I just wanted to highlight two concrete examples from our projects. Yeah. So one example is, it's actually the first investment that we did outside of Asia and our first in Africa. It's a solar power project in Egypt, close to 500 megawatts, the Bentab Solar Power Park. And this project will support the government of Egypt in achieving its goal of having at least 20% of its electricity from renewable energy sources, and thereby displacing the use of fossil fuels as their major source. And at the same time, it will also reduce about 500,000 tons of CO2 per year. So it's directly speaking to the climate finance goal. And then the second project that I'd like to highlight is a recently approved project, this time on the connectivity side. So here we have a road connectivity project in the north of Côte d'Ivoire, which is a highly agricultural region. They're the major producer of cotton and cashews in Côte d'Ivoire. And the project that we're financing there is going to see the rehabilitation of 7,000 kilometers of road, which will help to provide more efficient transport within the region, but also in connecting the region to major corridors that lead to international gateways for trade. So the primary product of this region, about 90% of that is going to Asia. So here we really see a concrete example of how our projects on the ground are directly contributing to our goals of green infrastructure and connectivity.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for explaining that mandate and also the examples. AFDB, you're really well known for infrastructure focus. How do you make it green and focused on connectivity?
True. No, thank you, Hannah. And I think our approach is similar to our colleagues from the AIIB. I think the only difference from our side is that we have been on the continent for almost 60 years. And we have always been working on infrastructure development. That has always been the key of our objectives and what we are trying to do. This has changed recently to include the regional integration, green infrastructure, more climate adaptive type of projects. And
that's your alarm rather than mine going on.
I think this is not green. No, this is not green. So, and I think those has always been and remain on top of our priorities. We have been investing, just to give you a flavor, we have in the last 6 years alone, we have invested $10 billion in infrastructure projects. That they are all climate compliant, that are meeting our environmental and social safeguards requirements, they are aligned with the Paris alignments. So we are very proud that, to give you a flavor, the Lagos-Abidjan road project, Lagos-Abidjan corridor project, this is a way of promoting speedy type of transportation, saving time, saving energy, and the life of people of the two cities. We have the regional express train in Senegal. This is how we are developing infrastructure in one key African country, which is Senegal. We have the Noor Orzazat solar complex in Morocco, where we are moving them to the green energy. So what I'm trying to say here is that Our DNA has always been infrastructure. Our challenge has always been infrastructure, but gradually we are taking more challenges to be green, climate, and so on. On concrete actions also, just to give you a bigger, a wider flavor, is on the type of alliances and how we're bringing more partners to collaborate with us, and that's why we have established what we call the Alliance for Green Infrastructure in Africa, where we are doing TA and investments. And let me stop here and I will come later. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And I love how you're all bringing in some really clear examples, also several sectors, energy, transport, and that again, you know, these are plugging real infrastructure gaps, but also at the same time delivering green and resilient action as well. So again, you know, we generally we often associate infrastructure with MDBs and what governments do, but obviously private sector is highly involved and more, not just involved as delivering the contracts and but actually even investing and so on. So I wanted to ask our two private sector representatives here, Mr. Kai and Mr. Leo and Nader, why is Africa in particular interesting for delivering infrastructure? What makes it an important proposition?
Thank you, Hannah. You know, it's Power China is a very largest is a construction and development company. Yeah, in the world we are I think is top number 6 largest contractors. Yeah, except for the construction we also do some investment. Yeah. By the end of this June, we have invested around 18 gigawatts energy projects in China, and it's also about 7 gigawatts overseas. Yeah, 70% is about renewable energies. In South Africa, in Africa now, you know, we started our business I think over 20 years. Yeah, in the past it was 20 years. We completed installed capacity almost 10 gigawatts. Yeah, it's about about 9 gigawatts is about hydro, and another is 1 gigawatts is about solar and wind power. Now we pay more attention in the investment in the green energy project in Africa. Main reason, you know, is we think is here you have the resources. The green energy resources is very good. Yeah, for example, solar energy potential is around 40% of the global total potential. Yeah, wind power potential also is around 32%. Yeah, so it's a very big. Also, you know, is in other continents sometimes it's about the annual generation for the solar PV project. Generally speaking, is about less than 2,000 hours per year. But in Africa, most of them can reach 2,200 hours per year. Yeah. Also is here, you know, now is in Africa now the energy infrastructure still weak. Yeah, but you know in the last 20 years the economy is developing very fast. Yeah. Now they have the big gap for energy. That means a big market. Also in our opinion, we think it is not very risky to do investment in Africa. Yeah, compare in other regions, according to our experience, particularly in the Southern Africa.
Yeah. Well, let's come to this.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, you know, in Africa now most of the country government now they have established there energy transition strategy or framework, this and that. You know, I know many people they complain. They say, oh, the law it's not incomplete, but in fact, yeah, the PPP laws and investment law, investment protection laws are increasing, yeah, including improved, yeah. So we think now we have changed our strategy. Now we have almost 2.5 gigawatts green energy infrastructure projects and evaluation for investment. Thank you.
So a very clear business case, both in terms of potential, but also in terms of the I guess policy infrastructure in a sense to be getting there and the ambition. How about for Orascom? Would you concur with that?
Absolutely, and I think you covered it very eloquently. I think the short answer to that is Africa does have the potential and does have the need. And I think with putting together contractors, developers, multilaterals, of course, and the governments, I think there's a very compelling story in Africa for upgrading the infrastructure across the board, for improving the overall life standard. And really, as Orascom, I think we really believe that infrastructure projects, which is something that we specialize in, it touches the daily lives of citizens and people all over the country, all over the region. And that's something that is beyond the business, is something that's very meaningful for putting all the hard work together, putting all the resources together. Now, as an EPC contractor and also as a developer, so we are not only doing jobs where we are getting paid and we leave. No, for certain projects, for certain regions, our money is where our mouth is, and we really think the potential within Africa is fantastic, but it also comes with its own challenges. And I think you mentioned also the daily, or sorry, the annual spend for just one country, so you can protract that over the entire continent. Just to give a bit of an example, for Egypt, we have, and the numbers will seem very modest compared to Power China, but we're not specialized only in renewables or only in power, but we have developed and constructed 250 megawatts of renewable wind farm in Egypt. Another 500 megawatts are under construction already. Another 3 gigawatts are under development. That's not just as an EPC contractor, but also as an equity investor. If you go to Burundi, a small hydropower plant that is financed by the World Bank, AIIB, AFDB as well. We're working as an EPC contractor, and you can really see the potential that Africa has overall.
Great. And again, those live examples I think are really useful for us to understand. I'm going to come in now, sort of transition us a little bit, because you already started speaking about it, but the opportunities and challenges. So going from what you've already done and what has already been done to what does a future look like? In terms of opportunities, and I'm going to come back to the MDBs again in the room, in terms of your views on opportunities, where do you think there are possibilities for innovation, and where can you bring innovation in, whether it's structuring PPPs, cross-country projects? What is the role of innovation to seeing these opportunities for green infrastructure and connectivity? And perhaps even from the Asian region, since we're also talking specifically of AIIB. Could we start with AIIB for that one?
Opportunities. I think it's actually a very good question, especially at this point of the credit cycle. We have been living through a very long period of very low interest rate, and infrastructure has been built at a very competitive price. So irrespective, we use a PPA or corporate way to do, the past has a very favorable facilitating environment, but going from this point onwards, if we live in a slightly different environment, I think there probably has to be more innovative solution. We can spend the whole day here to debate, should we use a power purchase agreement, should we use a concession of a road, etc. In a nutshell, I think all the stakeholders probably need to work together to think through who own the asset, who benefit from the asset. Is there a balance between sustainability and affordability? I wouldn't have the full answer here, but I thought that is especially true for Africa, when you have a huge opportunity, huge capacity to be built. What type of assumption we make about the future? Do we keep some flexibility in all these legal agreements? So that is one part I would give the audience and my fellow panelists as an ingredient for thought. The second part is a connectivity. We notice actually people think about the international connectivity more than the regional connectivity. For Asia, it's easier to understand because there are not so many landlocked countries in Southeast Asia. So connectivity is always connected to international. But for Africa, I think we do need to think through how the internal connectivity will help address the social side. I stop here. Actually, Suzanne probably can add more because she's working on many projects.
Thanks, Rick. So just to piggyback on this this topic of connectivity, I think one of the low-hanging fruit in terms of opportunities is making the connection between internal connectivity in a country and how this can be promote better international connectivity, and of course connectivity with Asia, since we're coming from that perspective. I mean, it's when we think of international connectivity, immediately we might think of a port, an airport, but I mean, you can only build so many and make them so big before at some point you need to start thinking about connectivity within the country itself. So to cite an example from one of our projects, as I mentioned earlier, this our recently concluded or recently approved Rose project in northern Côte d'Ivoire. A big focus of that is improving the internal connectivity of this highly agricultural region and linking this, the rural parts where the agricultural products are coming from to the urban centers, which are well connected to transport corridors leading to international gateways, and thereby opening up this region. So by not just focusing narrowly on this question of international or Asia connectivity, but looking at the problem in a more holistic view, we've managed to solve or contribute significantly both to improving access to socioeconomic facilities within the region, while at the same time connecting this region on a broader level to more opportunities for international trade, which will of course improve the economics of the region overall.
Yeah, so we might see more cashews from Côte d'Ivoire end up in Malaysia or Thailand. No bad thing, that's great. What about from AFDB's perspective? Yeah, what do you say are the opportunities for innovation?
Yeah, I think the innovation for us is, again, on the infrastructure, on the use of the alternative building material, construction material, and so on. But we should also not underplay the fact that we need alternative debt capital market solutions. We need more players when it comes to institutional investors coming to inject resources into the African infrastructure projects. You said in the beginning that in Kenya it is between 10 to 12 billion a year. I can give you the bigger figure. There's an estimation that the infrastructure gap in Africa is between 120 to 150 billion dollars a year. So all budgets together, all balance sheets together are not enough. And that's why the innovation is in how to mobilize additional resources that will come and chip in and to play, that we as MDBs play a catalytic role in the delivery, in the deployment, and also in ensuring the sustainability of those designs. Digital connectivity is a great opportunity because Africa youth are really in terms of numbers, more than 50% in some countries. So digital connectivity, it's an area where we can actually create jobs where they are sitting in their home countries. The brain drain is something that we are facing, but again, when we are doing this kind of digital connectivity between African countries, you can have the return of working abroad, yet you are in your home country. So I think no need to repeat what our colleagues from AIIB said when it comes to infrastructure development, but I think the financial new alternative that capital market solutions, innovation, de-risking, and so on are key for the future of infrastructure development in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it is a really major issue, isn't it? How do you actually structure, but also bring in more finance, of course, but structure it in such a way that it can really deliver way more than it was delivering before. And I think that's still something we're still struggling with. Private sector, how do you see these opportunities? What gets you engaged? What kinds of innovations do you see and enabling environments do you see that brings you to the table to start working on infrastructure and green infrastructure and connectivity in particular? Nader, would you like to begin?
Quite honestly, it's the honest answer is that creativity and innovation and infrastructure, they are not the usual suspects that go hand in hand. That's the reality. We've been doing infrastructure projects for God knows how many years, and it is so rare to find an opportunity that is with a very new angle, that is with a very innovative solution, whether on the technical side or on the funding side, because infrastructure is boring. That's the conventional infrastructure. That's the reality of the situation. Now, if you start to refer to infrastructure in the wider sense, as Gregory mentioned earlier, then this is where innovation is really important, and the gaps can only be bridged on those digital solutions, on the innovative solutions, when it comes to the less conventional infrastructure solutions. I think the other challenge that is really hammering all of us is the pace. Is the pace of the 120 billion per year versus what is being offered by MDBs, multilaterals, etc. Is this the right pace, or are we still moving at a slower pace than actually what we need?
Infrastructure is boring, but how does Power China come in? What enabling environment do you see? To be involved in infrastructure development, what enabling environment do you need and look for?
Okay. In fact, you know, Power China now is we do a business in Africa. We have these two types. One, the EPC, the plus financing arrangement. This one also is now we have invested some of the energy project in Africa. In Zimbabwe and DRC, the total is capacity is about near 1 gigawatt. Yeah, so it's when we evaluate such a project, we found is now except for we pay more attention is about these on the non-factors. Non-technical factors, particularly is about the payment, the security instrument for the PPA payment, and also is about sometimes is about land acquisition and environmental impact assessment, this and that. You know, it's but the bottleneck is about a security instrument for the PPA payment, this one, yeah. For example, you know, is before we facilitate ZESCO to do the carbon loss extension, the power projects, they get a fund from China Exim Bank without government guarantee, without letter of comfort from government. Yeah, Sinosure is provide the insurance for the loan, but only for the political risks, no commercial risks. So it's we work together with that goal. Then we design use PPA mortgage PPA and plus escrow account. So it's now this project is completed is 10 years ago. Now the repayment is over. Yeah, without any delay, even in COVID-19 period. So it's in my personal view, I think it is very important to design the security instrument for the PPA payment for the energy projects. Yeah.
So these are government interventions in a sense, and innovations which can help also bring in private sector and get private sector more involved in actually investing, not just delivering infrastructure. What role for MDBs in doing that, in trying to kind of structure and bring in and collaborate, examples, I guess, of collaboration with the private sector on infrastructure, green infrastructure and connectivity? Have you got some examples of that kind of success?
Okay. I can share some example. It actually leads back to my earlier points. How do we strike a balance between affordability and sustainability? As MDB, I think our unique advantage is we are owned by the government. We do see the other side of the coin. So maybe we are slightly better positioned to have a meaningful conversation with both the private sector and the government side. I wouldn't name the country, but there are some countries we're working on. They have a big plan to build up the renewable capacity. We understand that's actually part of their carbon zero planning. They need to build gas-fired, and then they will have a stable supply. They will then increase the renewable, gradually reduce the gas-fired. But the issue they would face is what is a sustainable tariff? Is it 2 US cents or 9 US cents? People need to take a view on the long-term sustainability. For private sector, they are keen to go into such investment because there should be some return, also help the country transit. But if the government does not firm up their thoughts on what risk they put on the private sector side, it's difficult. It's a market, they use local currency, but the borrowing is in hard currency. So in that circumstances, the innovative solution we give is actually not traditional project finance. There is some residual foreign exchange risk is kept by the big sponsor as the investor. They take a 20-year horizon view, and we would allow them to give more subordinated loan if the value of the currency depreciate significantly. But when the value get back, they will be able to get their return back. So that's one example I would share how we help private sector. We also talk to other commercial lender, enable them to understand with our participation in the project, the political risk side, changing law risk can be partially mitigated. That would be example. Suzanne, if you have anything to add from your road.
I can just add quickly. So private sector participation on the financing side, but also on the execution side, we see as important because private sector participation in execution can lead to efficiencies and cost savings in the realization of the infrastructure. So in cases where we see markets may not be fully ready to participate in an effective manner, we bring along with our projects technical assistance to provide market readiness through capacity building. So in one of our roads projects, for example, we are building capacity amongst private sector in the use of outputs and performance-based road contracts, and we're also building their capacity in the use of nature-based solutions for climate resilience related to road infrastructure. And we see this kind of building capacity and allowing private sector to play a role also having a positive impact on the economy, because it allows you to spread the participation amongst a wider base rather than just relying on everything being public sector driven.
Yeah, thank you. So you're reducing the risk to enable the private sector basically to take a longer view and be more patient, right? Is that the same for AFTB?
It is the same, but maybe I will add just a different angle, which is upstream work, where we are going into dialogue between or we play the mediator role between the private sector and the governments, where we as the African Development Bank, through our projects, through our policy-based operations, through our budget support transaction, try to change the status quo, try to put in place the right policies under which private sector can chip in without any kind of red tapes that can affect their way of doing business. We are also working on policy reforms, as I said, when it comes to changing the entry and exit from the market. This is something that we're very actively doing in Sub-Saharan Africa specifically. Last but not least, we have since 2018 we have set what we call the Africa Investment Forum, where we are creating a physical marketplace between private sector, policymakers, developers, development finance institutions, and commercial banks. They are all coming together, sitting, sorting out the solutions, putting it on the table, and identify the best way forward. It is something that is happening on a yearly basis, and the next one is in November. It is in Marrakesh, so you are all welcome to attend. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to that invitation. Always happy to come over to North Africa. So MDBs, obviously, you're doing a lot. Is that, I mean, certainly everybody can do more, right? This is the point. And I want to ask our private sector participants, what can the MDBs do more based on your experience, perhaps of working with MDBs or seeing what's out there? What would you suggest that they can do more in order for green infrastructure and connectivity on this continent?
It's when, sorry, you want to do first? When we evaluate some of the green energy projects in Africa, now it's, I think it's mainly, it's just now I mentioned, is about the security instrument for the PPA payment. You know, it's like Gregory is mentioned now, is about the local currency and hard currency. The problem is how to balance it. We hope is if MD Bank can establish some mechanism for this currency depreciation risks. Yeah. Also, you know, it's now part China is we are promoting a new business model we call DOBT, design, development, develop, own, build, and transfer. Yeah. Then the main purpose is we would like to facilitate our partner, particularly is local green energy project developer is to solve their challenge in the financial process. Yeah, particularly it's about equity Also, you know, sometimes the projects is very feasible. Everything is okay. Just because the project's developer or sponsor is a little weak. So the need is very strong financial balance sheet. So is Power China can do this, but we also is face two challenges. One is about the security instrument for the PP payment. One is about the currency issues.
Two very, very practical suggestions. How about from your side, Nada?
I thought the first words that are going to come out of Liu's mind is just give us the money. I would ask MDBs to just give us the money. We will develop the projects, and you don't have to worry about it. No. As Orascom, again, we have the luxury of comparing projects that we're doing as an EPC contractor, where typically MDB's involvement is not there, and other opportunities where MDBs are really involved. And to be honest, before we put the asks and the requests for the MDBs, I just have to acknowledge the value that generally MDBs add to these projects. And it's not just words or theoretical or policy matters. They are also very pragmatic, and they are also very realistic added values to the projects. If you evaluate any project that has MDB financing, there is certainly great attention to the social aspect. On top of the direct social aspect of the infrastructure project or the connectivity project, there is a very unique and bespoke study of the project, and there's a social aspect to it. That's something you don't see on projects that are bankrolled by the government's budget. And here I'd like to pause and say there is no right and wrong. And it's not just being politically correct, although that's a plus, but also you have to be very realistic. Egypt, let's take Egypt as an example. 2016, we were having power cuts nationwide. No one could have afforded a lengthy process of due diligence and putting multiple MDBs together to do the typical process to unlock some funds. So as an EPC contractor, we were given certain contracts for mega projects. These were the Siemens power plants. Each was a capacity of 4,800 megawatts, and the execution was immediate, because there was a time of need with nationwide power cuts. If you fast forward a few years later, when the Benban solar park was an added value, what needs to happen is that the pace, again, for MDBs has to be vetted or visited. The other thing is, from a risk allocation point of view, we, as Orascom, and I'm sure any other private sector company, take their equity investments very seriously. And therefore, the risk allocation on these particular projects, from a long-term point of view, have to be very balanced. Otherwise, the structure collapses and it's not sustainable to continue the development. And that's where I think MDBs also play a very constructive role and a very supportive role. The other thing, I think, on the other hand, is different MDBs have different policies. They are quite common, but it is always the case that you need to satisfy all MDBs, and there is absolutely no room for flexibility, which again puts a drag on time, puts a drag on the viability of certain projects, because often the policy is, as an MDB, I do not finance entirely or solely the project.
And there's obviously an additional risk that if you're incorporating green and climate resilient, or even other types of issues in there, it may become even more complicated, right? Even though it's the right thing to do, but how do you make sure that you do the right thing, but keep the complexity low? That's always
absolutely.
So I'm aware that we are coming. Yeah.
If I may chip in.
Yes, you may. You may. Oh, I like this. Yes, please.
To answer the client side question, as a new MDB, I think there's one thing AIIB is slightly different from our elder brothers and sisters. We are probably the only one in co-financing can use our co-financiers ESG standard, as long as we have done earlier due diligence, feel that they are compatible with ours. This will help avoid doubling the work, doubling the cost.
Great, very good. Good to know that that has been taken very seriously, that idea of efficiency, and it applies at every level. So I'm aware that we should have an opportunity for the audience to ask questions as well. So I'm going to ask someone with a roving mic, ideally, if anyone would like to ask our panelists some questions. We have one question here. We'll do a round. I've been using the moderator's prerogative far too much to ask my questions. So, yeah, time for audience. Thank you. Please introduce yourself and before you ask your question.
Thanks, great panel. Simon Zadek, Nature Finance. I have a short-term and a longer-term question. The short-term really picks up on the foreign exchange risk issue, which obviously, has a significant delta to the cost of capital. And I'm wondering whether you or any of the other panel members have a view as to either some of the local currency proposals that are being put forward at the moment with all the publicly financed hedging mechanisms in play, or whether switching from US denominated debt to RMB or other major currencies might be a way in which to reduce foreign exchange risks. And then the longer play is, sadly, Africa will suffer unduly from climate change impacts, and that will impact their cost of capital. And I'm curious, particularly from the MDBs on the panel, what your thinking is as some African countries increasingly get pushed out of capital markets entirely as a result. Thank you.
Two very good questions. Could we take any other questions from the audience? Would anyone else? Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Habib Hayan. I'm the CEO of Shelter Afrique, which is a development finance institution based in Nairobi, 44 countries across the continent. So when you talk about green infrastructure, I would like to understand what do you put in there, right, as a green infrastructure across your institutions, and how do you climate change and basically displacements due to climate-induced sort of catastrophes, Libya, Morocco. How do you make sure that actually people's lives are saved, right, and not affected when you have such catastrophes? So resilience, right? Anything to do with resilience in your respective institutions. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, well, three excellent questions there. Thank you very much. Who would like to take, maybe, yes? I think so, that would be great.
Maybe, thanks. I think the question from Habib is very relevant on what is green and how green is green and why it is green.
It's controversial.
It's very controversial. And I think it's full of gray areas, and he knows because he's also coming from the IFC. So, so he knows that it is very gray area. But I think at MDBs, we have the environmental and social management safeguards, systems, analysis, reporting, classification and ratings. They are world-class, they are similar. So if you go to AIIB today, you will have the same policies of the AFDB, and if you go to the World Bank, 200%, you will have the same policies, okay? So the classification of a project on how it is green or compliant, or even when it comes to the notes, how it is a green note or a green bond or whatever, it is based on an international best practice, international standards. And we have teams in place who are really working in that domain. So it is not the investment team who classify the projects. It is an independent team who is classifying it. And they are very independent to the extent that they're not reporting to the same line of reporting like the commercial team. Maybe briefly on the local currency risks, of course, we have the famous type of hedging mechanisms. like the TCX and the likes. In some cases, it's very workable. In some cases, it's very expensive. We are really, in often cases, they're not available. But we and here I'm talking about the African Development Bank, we are really keen to deploy as much as possible local currency funding. We have already 7 currencies from South African Rand, Egyptian Pound, Kenyan Shilling, Nigerian Naira, and so on and so forth. We are trying to eliminate the foreign currency risk in the short to medium term, and we really have very strong ambitions in even rolling it to other countries. Let me stop here, and then maybe my colleagues from AIIB.
Yes, AIB, the clean, lean, and green bank. So
solution-driven bank.
this should be easy for you.
But I think the foreign currency risk, my colleague from AFDB has given very good answer. I just add 2 points. On the energy side, where we do use local currency loan in the market, we have capacity, or we work with partners who can provide local currency facility to mitigate the risk. But I would also encourage the energy sector to learn from the road sector. For example, Colombia's toll road used to only borrow hard currency, but then they realized if they only borrow hard currency, they are so exposed. So the authority who gives the concession actually insert a mechanism in it. Every 5 years, they will do a look back to see how far away that assumption is from the reality, and then they are allowed to adjust the tariff or the length of the concession to make good for this type of issue. So I think innovation is needed if we were to tackle the foreign exchange risk. I thought you have another question about the cutoff from the capital market. In fact, my colleague on African Development Bank is the FI sector. I'd be delighted to introduce to you, in Asia, we have participated in some securitization projects. Commercial bank would be reluctant to hold this project finance loan forever. So they would sell part of the loan into a vehicle, and this vehicle can be used to issue bonds to get access to capital markets. So I get the different stakeholders do need to sit down to think through how do they go through these cycles. Yeah, that's my additional answer to you.
Yeah, and that's obviously something that that you can bring to the table as well with those different experiences across the region. How about Mr. Liu? What do you have some answers to these questions as well? What are your thoughts in terms of no? Well, you talked about the currency risk already, didn't you? And in terms of do you expect the cost of capital to perhaps go up for African countries due to climate change, or is it your expectation that it might even go in a different direction?
Yeah, when we evaluate such climate-sensitive infrastructure, as generally speaking, is firstly we will identify the risks. Yeah. Then is for such risks, you know, it's always we will assume is different scenario. Yeah. Then is calculate is the potential is risk cost. Then maybe put into the financial model. That means it will increase the capital, yeah. But you know, is if MDB involved it, maybe they can give us much more confidence, yeah. So is this one also is you know, is about the currency, yeah. I know is Egypt government will issue the partner bond or partner security in China in RMB. So I think this also, you know, is particular for the green energy projects. You know, it's most of the like the solar PV, the modules manufactured in China, and also is equipment manu in China, is about, that means around is 75% cost, cost will be paid in RMB. If the government, if they use, we get fined from this, if the project is fined in RMB from China with assistance like the AIIB, then it's also is about the some local currency also can be use the repayment. Then that means the total cost we can reduce from local currency to US dollar to RMB, then it's come back again. We can reduce such risks and costs. Yeah, so I think is we also prefer is to use RMB, as a repayment. Also, when we sign the EP contract, we also preferred the project in RMB and the local currency. And now the third is hard currency. To reduce cost. But we need is like MDB. MDB is give us some the security instrument.
Always good to have the MDBs involved. And Nado?
On currency risk, I think it's a great question. It's something that we lose projects over issues like currency risk. And in my mind, as a group treasurer for a private sector company, currency risk lies with the government, with the off-taker, not with the private sector. And if there are capital hurdles on cost of foreign currency debt, you should look at also the alternative, which is local currency, which are even at much higher rates, which means eventually that the bill is higher for the government and then to the citizens or the population. Until such innovative solutions, if this risk is passed on to the private sector, then you lose a big portion of a private sector. If others are willing to accept that risk, they build it into their models and the tariffs become excessively high.
Yeah, I think Simon also raised a very important question about the impact of climate disaster or natural disaster and how it will be affecting our sovereigns. I think it's a very challenging question because you don't know when is the next crisis. You don't know how to mitigate it. You don't know when it will happen and where. I think what we are trying to do these days is really not to worsen the situation from MDBs when it comes to this kind of responsible lending, but at the same time, we are putting in our models this kind of climate risks. When it will happen and where, I think we have to be very careful in spotting it. So far, what happened in Libya and Morocco didn't affect them, well, at least for Morocco, didn't affect them majorly. When it comes to capital markets, it can happen for smaller countries, but then we have to deal with it. But until now, we don't know where is the next crisis going to happen. It's a very prudent type of answers, but I think this is the best way to address it. Thank you.
Just to touch quickly on the question that was asked about how do we ensure resilience in our projects. As part of our commitment to Paris alignment, that is an integral part of what we consider when we're evaluating projects. So even though our mandate is primarily towards green infrastructure that mitigates climate change, for every single project we evaluate what is the contribution to building climate resilience through adaptation, as well as what is the contribution to mitigation. And that is part of our commitment to having at least 50% of our investments being climate finance. So through our commitments as a bank, we're actually building into our projects resilience and looking for opportunities to increase resilience of our infrastructure projects, because this is important to ensure that infrastructure will meet its economic lifetime and not deteriorate beforehand, therefore resulting in money spent not to the means or not to the extent to which we can reap the benefits for as long as we should.
Thank you, Suzanne. Look, so we have almost run out of time, so I am going to ask one question to all of you and hope for a 1-minute quick fire answer, just to close us off today after this very practical and very interesting discussion. So if there was one key way that you could work together, in fact, in concrete terms, excuse the pun. We've said concrete several times today, but I had to say it's a pun. We're talking about infrastructure. In one concrete way, what could you do to advance the African-led sustainable development, sustainable infrastructure agenda on the continent, if there's one key way? And I'm going to start with Suzanne. I started with you before, so you start again, please.
I think the one key way in realizing African infrastructure potential is aligning goals with national development goals. And this is what we seek to do each time we undertake an investment in infrastructure. Of course, the bank's mandate is important, and we ensure that we are meeting our mandate in terms of green infrastructure and connectivity, but also ensuring that it meets the needs that are being sought.
Thank you. You've set the bar very high. Thanks. Greg.
Yeah, if there only one way, I would say we should bring knowledge and then take a fully open-hearted approach so that we can deepen that knowledge after the journey.
Open-hearted approach. Kaisin. Very happy approach. Okay, Nader, to you.
I think first we all have to acknowledge that Africa is not a homogeneous continent. It has very different fundamentals. Often external restrictions apply, and that's why I think there needs to be case-by-case dressing of the African continent.
Thank you. Case by case, another one key way. Liu Kai, your one key way?
If there's only one key way, is for partners, we would like to work together with our local partners now through the localization. We would like to use ours rich experience and expertise and strong is financial statement in the green energy to help to facilitate our local partners to realize their dreams in the green energy projects. Now we are doing. I call this model is DOBT. Thank you.
Thank you. And for you, Ahmed?
I think for me it's just one way with 3 feeders. One is the corporate governance, one is more dialogue, co-financing, and the last one is innovation.
Thank you very much. So we have co-financing and innovation, we have localization, we've got tailored approaches, open-hearted knowledge, and national alignment. Thank you very much. This has been your discussion on sustainable growth in Africa, green infrastructure and connectivity. Thank you very much to our esteemed panelists. I think you really brought not only your institutional selves to the table and to this discussion, but also your own selves and your experience. So thank you very much for that. And thank you to our audience for sticking with us and your great questions and interest as well. And thank you, AIIB, for putting this on.